Good afternoon, everyone. I heard parts of Owen's introduction there, so there might be a little bit of repetition on my side, just in terms of context. We're delighted, and thank you very much for joining today's panel, organised naturally by Cyber Ireland, but co-hosted by the Azure Forum on the future of Irish cyber defence and innovation. I must thank the board and Owen in particular for placing this topic on the agenda this year. What we aim to focus upon in particular are the relevant aspects for the membership of Cyber Ireland with respect to this year's Commission on Defence Forces report, innovation and industry opportunity. But we want to do so in a way that is meaningful for the membership of Cyber Ireland. As many of you know, there have been a number of historically significant and innovation changes that have come about over the past 2 to 3 years here in the Irish context. We've had the government's high-level action plan, which was released this summer on the implementation piece of the report. We've had the establishment of the Defence RTI Unit, so Research, Technology and Innovation Unit, which many of you might know about, as well as the feasibility study, which is available online should you want to read it. A number of you, I think this might be interesting as well, that John might touch upon or Mark might also be aware of the SFI Defence RTI research challenges that were launched over the past year or so. So with that, I guess the so what, the question we want to ask Mark and John, and to then open up to the floor, we'll invite both speakers up here, are what are the opportunities and the challenges for industry specifically in both Ireland but also Europe on cyber, dual use and emerging technologies. We'll begin with Colonel Mark Staunton, who is the Director of Communications, Information Services and Cyber at the Defence Forces of Ireland, followed by an intervention from John Mackey, who is a CEO at Embryonics, based in Galway. And the idea is then we'll, a slightly different format to the panel before, we'll open up to the floor, and I hope we'll have an interesting conversation with you all. So with that, I'll invite Mark up to the podium. So thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon all, and again thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak at such an auspicious occasion. It's certainly a privilege for me to be one of the people who managed to get outside the M50 and travel all the way to Cork. So thank you very much indeed. So yeah, I'm based in McKee Barracks in Dublin, in the headquarters of the Communications and Information Services Corps of the Defence Forces, and that's where we deliver all of our services from a CIS perspective. So CIS is Communications and Information Services, and cyber defence is obviously integral to the delivery of all CIS. So in terms of the propaganda that I push at the personnel I work with, I talk about two basic tenets of CIS: security and interoperability. So in terms of delivering military effects across multiple operational domains, such as land, sea, and air, mission success is governed by our ability as a defence force to securely and seamlessly share diverse information with like-minded partners in deployed mission network environments. So ultimately, we deliver military effects. So that is slightly different in the context of cybersecurity as opposed to cyber defense. So in terms of the real estate that I operate with on a daily basis, I obviously have tactical radio networks deployed in multiple environments. So I would have several thousand radios deployed at individual soldier level, up at platoon, company, and higher HQ level. I would also have various sensor systems on airframes, on naval vessels, and obviously I have multiple means of delivering diverse information. So from a resilience model perspective, typically I could be pushing data across HF, UHF, VHF. We could piggyback on GSM if it's available, let's say in Central African Republic, wherever we deploy out to. We typically deploy microwave networks, and our backhaul invariably is via satellite. So again, we're not typical of a civilian organization in the context of delivery of CIS services. So then, in terms of the Defence Forces, not only do I have all of our tactical data centers, our tactical reach-back facilities, our tactical radio solutions, our rapidly deployable solutions, I've got the white side of the house, as I call it. So I've got all of our networked devices on island and globally in green mission network environments. So I've got the white mission network environments and I've got the green mission network environments. So again, I would have approximately 3,500 PCs, laptops, and a variety of different other digital devices, in addition to mission fire control systems, sighting systems, imaging systems, camera solutions, all of which are I'm required to pull the data from those multiple repositories and fuse that data via 2 data centers, one in McKee Barracks, one in Newbridge, and ultimately deliver a joint common operational picture. So I've got a recognized maritime picture, I've got a recognized air picture, I've got land component elements deployed, and I'm pulling data from sensors from all of those domains into a JCOP, as we call it, a joint common operational picture, which then is used for operational decision making. So literally, we're looking at a screen in McKee Barracks. We could have a PC-12 deployed, streaming data via microwave on a real-time situation with a kinetic intervention about to happen, and we're using those data sources ultimately to make a call in terms of go, no go, or to shape whatever intervention we deem appropriate. So then moving into cyber defense and military cyber defense, clearly all of these systems have to be secured from my perspective. So our first cybersecurity strategy was back in 2013, and it wasn't particularly sophisticated. There were 5 basic pillars, the first of which obviously is to defend our networks. And that again is the people, process, technology adage. So we would obviously deploy a combination of all 3, and we would set about attempting to defend our networks. The next pillar is straightforward, incident response, resolution. So again, employing the same adage, we'd employ a range of services and personnel ready to respond to an incident and to try and respond from it. In terms of capability development, which is the biggest challenge I have as leading the CIS services within the Defence Forces, is really around the people side of the house. So we've got various means of inducting personnel and training them and specialising them in discrete areas. So at foundational level, we bring in people, so young soldiers, and we train them up as communications operatives. And integral to a ComOp course, which is a 12-week program, there would be discrete cybersecurity modules on basic cyber hygiene. So each of those individuals in a deployed mission network environment clearly needs some competence or some degree of skill set to secure the networks at an operational level that they're employed in and the services they're delivering, like personal radios and the plethora or panoply of other services that typically would be in a deployed mission network environment. We also have trainee technicians, which typically take about 3 years to train. So again, working with the various ITs around the country, we identify programs and we push people through those programs to train up our technicians. And then certain officers, we identify discrete, all of them do a level 9 masters in military communications, and then we push them onto other discrete programs or masters programs as required. And that applies on island in terms of programs that we'd identify here within the Irish educational ecosystem at 3rd level, but also accessing other professional courses, let's say discrete courses for discrete technologies that we would have as part of our CIS services. From a cyber awareness training perspective, that's obviously endemic to each level of the organization, and again, it's integral to every level of induction into the organization. So from recruits through to senior level management, cyber awareness training is something that we conduct routinely. And finally, in terms of the final pillar of our cybersecurity strategy, it centers around what we're doing today, which is collaboration. And collaboration is fundamental to the Defence Forces cyber posture. So clearly, we'd engage with the likes of Cyber Cluster Ireland, which is fantastic, but so too industry, academia, both the National Cybersecurity Centre, other agencies on island, but also internationally, in terms of our European partners, ENISA. We embrace any opportunity to engage with the likes of PESCO projects, EDF projects if appropriate. And then we would partner with the likes of CCD-COE in terms of our cyber training programs. So I was smiling about Liz and her team talking this morning around testing versus simulation. So routinely we would access cyber ranges in multiple deployed mission network environments. So you're talking about military employment here, military effects being delivered, where we would simulate a deployed mission network environment with multiple platforms in play. And in effect, we would engage in a series of scenarios where there is various cyber challenges presented to our personnel in terms of defending those networks. So moving on to the Commission on Defence then. As part of our submission, the CIS Corps submission to the Commission on Defence, we espoused the development of a full CR cyber capability, both offensive, defensive, and an ISR capability. And we used a reference model from NATO CCD-COE for our proposal, and we presented that up to the Commission on Defence and said, for us to further professionalise cyber within the Defence Forces, these are the structures we're espousing, and we need your permission, your endorsement for that. So we had a joint cyber operations unit with multiple services associated with it, and then cyber RRTs, rapid reaction teams, at brigade and service level. So they would have a broad range of functionality, but primary, in terms of this audience, would be a contingent capability to support the likes of the NCSC in the event of an extremis, that we'd have personnel to deploy out in support of the national effort, as was the case during the HSE cyber attacks. So my final point, what happened with the Commission on Defence? Our proposals were endorsed. So one of the action points that's been endorsed by the government in consideration of the Commission on Defence is the establishment of a joint cyber operations unit, or Joint Cyber Operations Command, which is good news, and an increase in our personnel up to 100 personnel, level of ambition 2. So next January, we have a detailed implementation plan, detailed action plan being enunciated or presented or promulgated, and based on that, I will then be building out a Joint Cyber Operations Command per the Commission on Defence's recommendations and government direction, which currently is agreed in principle. In other words, there's a little bit more work to be done in terms of filling out those structures, which will happen in January. So that's a whistle-stop tour of military cyber defence. But I would welcome questions from me as opposed to sitting up here. So please engage and lash a few questions at me. Thank you.
Let's see now. There should be some slides there. Yeah, great. Brilliant. Hi folks, so my name is John Mackey. I'm the CEO of a Galway-based company called Embryonics. We specialize in satellite laser communications and photonics technologies. So very happy and delighted to be here today to just discuss a little bit about what we're doing. And very interesting, Cormac, the next sort of jet layer we hope that we deployed will be the optical layer. So what our company focuses on is I suppose what's happening in space is a new era of satellite communications where up to around 60,000 to 100,000 satellites will be deployed over the next 10 years. And these are a hybrid of commercial and government systems providing a variety of applications, secure communications, global broadband, Earth observation systems, spy satellites, and all sorts of other things. And they're being deployed in various different orbits. The International Space Station will be sort of in a low Earth orbit, sort of around 500, 1,200 kilometers in altitude. Medium Earth orbit, a bit higher, and then up into geostationary orbit, around 36,000 kilometers in altitude. And so what's happening is like the transition from what's today has been primarily sort of radio frequency-based communications. The problem with that is it's bandwidth limited, but also it's quite easy to intercept and to hack. So a new era of communications is coming in based on lasers. The beam is much narrower, so it's very hard to intercept, to jam, and it provides sort of similar capabilities to the fiber network in terms of much higher bandwidth, up to maybe 100 to 1,000 times greater bandwidth. Look, everyone's quite familiar, I suppose, with a gentleman by the name of Elon Musk, who's deploying quite a significant constellation called Starlink, anything up to sort of 40,000 satellites being deployed over the next couple of years. And he's one of the early companies to really start deploying this type of technology. But also the government has a big interest in this in the US, so the Pentagon is building out what they call the National Defense Space Infrastructure. It's a constellation of satellites in a low Earth orbit, will be approximately around 500 satellites. And it's built in multiple tiers, so it's got different functionalities. One functionality is to provide always-on communications for any area in the world that it would have various operations of sort of in-theater action. But also has a missile tracking layer, so if any sort of missiles were deployed anywhere from the planet, that this system would be able to track it. And why are they building these satellites in low Earth orbit? Well, one of the reasons is, look, before Russia invaded Ukraine, they demonstrated what we would call an ASAT test, where they had a satellite and they blew it up with their own missile. So these anti-satellite weapons. And what this sort of is, traditionally satellites would cost maybe $500 million to $1 billion. The spy satellites would be significantly more expensive, and they would typically be in a fixed geostationary orbit, sort of prime target to be destroyed by one of these missiles. So by bringing them much closer to Earth, and by having a lot more of them, so these satellites are getting a bit cheaper, where they would have cost exactly like 500 million, they're now sort of becoming more in the region of around maybe $1 million per satellite. So they're able to build a lot more of them and deploy a lot more of them. And with companies like SpaceX building much bigger rockets, they're getting much cheaper to launch, and also you can launch them in much bigger quantities. The problem about, though, having satellites in low Earth orbit, they're not fixed. These satellites are moving at approximately 500 kilometers a second. And so you suddenly have to consider building out a intranet in space where these satellites are all interconnected. Because if they're over any given point on the Earth, you might have like a 5-10 minute window where you'd have connectivity. So being able to reroute the data on orbit and have this sort of always-on connectivity now becomes quite important. It's not just doing communications. In terms from the point of view of, this technology can also use for quantum key distribution. So this is using quantum physics to deploy these what are known as quantum keys. And this is, in terms of in the era of quantum computing, which will be able to sort of hack traditional cybersecurity sort of algorithms. The answer to solving that is, again, quantum technologies, where you can use these quantum keys to provide sort of unhackable security in your infrastructure. The problem is they can only propagate over a certain limited range of distance over terrestrial fiber. So the only way to truly, at the moment, have a global communication infrastructure using quantum key distribution is over free space links over satellite. So it's very exciting in terms of opportunity to do that technology for that as well. So as far as what Embryonics does, yes, so we're currently a prime contractor on a DARPA program called Space Baking. It's a great name. It stands for Space-Based Adaptive Communication Node. And it's fundamentally building a new standard for optical communications. It's to really enable it to be forwards and backwards compatible. It has cybersecurity built in as design, but it's to really enable this new era of commercial systems and government systems to be fully interoperable. And you can imagine the challenges around cybersecurity when you start mixing those sorts of infrastructure pieces together. So that's really the challenge we're facing in terms of deploying this new infrastructure. Again, look, with what we've seen, I suppose, even it was highlighted through, I suppose, the invasion of Ukraine, was that traditional satellite operators, Viasat, for instance, their whole infrastructure was hacked, and their services became null and void in Ukraine. And that was, they discovered a weakness in a ground-based infrastructure. So a modem was the access point, and that's where they were able to knock out all the communication infrastructure over Viasat's broadband system into Ukraine. And Starlink, quite prominently deployed a lot of user terminals into Ukraine, and on a daily basis, they're having to continually avoid having their systems hacked. So it's quite a significant challenge, and optical communications has quite a significant role to play as part of it. So just want to touch base a little bit on what's really been a very exciting new thing that's really emerged is the RTI Unit, the Research Technology and Innovation Unit. And this is really established in 2021. It's part of the DoD and Defense Forces strategy statement between 2021 and 2023. And what's exciting about it is the first dedicated civil-military unit. And it's just going back a little bit to this idea of mixing infrastructure between government and commercial systems. It's, I suppose, for space, what's interesting is companies like SpaceX and companies like Embryonics are doing what used to be more, government-led technologies and infrastructure implementations. And for companies like Embryonics, we have to be able to now deliver capability that meets military standards. And that's where something like the RTI unit is very exciting, because it gives the real building up from the ground up, that sort of lines of communication, because it's a real partnership between the civil and military space. The first stage is this partnership with Science Foundation Ireland, and it's where research organisations can team up with the Defence Forces. And the first call was out in 2021. It's a fund of 2.4 million, and it had sort of a challenge-based call, but you're also able to propose disruptive ideas. So anything basically covering anything artificial intelligence, data analytics, robotics, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, UAVs, and advanced communications. And it goes through a phase basis, and the finalists will compete for an overall prize of around €1 million. But you get some sort of seed funding at the initial, if you're selected, you get some seed money just to bring that idea forwards. Stage 2, though, is going beyond, I suppose, early TRL, or that ideation stage. And it's really where, at a national standpoint, we start to look at more at the broader European context, and even beyond that. So the European Defence Fund was also launched quite recently. It went through a few different iterations, and it's now formally launched. And it's covering, again, the full life cycle from research right through to the development stage and through to capability. And it's a total fund of 8 billion over the next to 2027. So it's a very, very significant investment. And what's bringing together, though, is that voice of all the member states. So it's, this is really why it's so important to have the RTI unit, because we have to develop what are Ireland's needs. And we have to do it from the ground up, but we also have to do it from the top down, because Ireland is now, if you like, now playing with the big boys as well. We're talking about with France, with Germany, who have obviously much, much bigger defence budgets. And for Ireland and industry, this is one of the challenges for Irish companies, startups, whether it's small, medium enterprises, to be able to participate and engage and access this sort of funding. We have to have capabilities, infrastructure, technologies that are not just attractive, but are at the right TRLs, that are applicable to more than just Ireland's needs. But what it does give, though, is Ireland a voice within that context. And so when these projects are formulated and funded, they do have to meet Ireland's needs. And they cover a very, very wide area. There's a number of project calls that come out every few years. And this slide sort of gives a good overview of quite a few of them. And I suppose and again in an Irish context, so more in 2021, Irish industry got together to form the Irish Defence and Security Association, to bring together both researchers, the Defence Forces, and industry together to have, I suppose, a voice, identify what skill sets we have, where are the gaps. And it's really, I suppose, to be a voice to both government and the wider context, and also on the European and global stage. And it's really, I suppose, this time we're in now is really bringing this voice together of, look, where are I suppose we're seeing energy crises. Sovereignty is quite a key thing that keeps emerging. Sovereignty of data, sovereignty of services, sovereignty of power, in terms of energy. And there's quite a number of key areas to address. So the timing of this is obviously quite important and appropriate, which has obviously been just emphasized with the Russia-Ukraine situation. So look forward to your questions, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Mark and John. So I think we have 10 to 15 minutes for questions. If I don't see any hands raised yet, one item that struck me, sorry, I'm just moving things here because I'm a little bit clumsy. I think this is yours, Mark, is it?
It is.
Yeah. Great, I've got the notebook. Just something you said, Mark, actually, with respect to the recommendation and subsequent acceptance by government within the action plan of LOA2 and 100 personnel as the ambition target. I would imagine there are a number of experts here in the room, or even our colleagues. We heard earlier from NCSC, about the expansion and the growth of personnel within the centre, up towards 50 plus individuals. So I guess it would be interesting to hear from you, Mark, how if you've already thought about it, how you might intend to grow that type of capability. And I would say those figures were benchmarked against international good practice within that sphere. So in the defence context, the numbers make sense, and it's only LOA at level of ambition 2 as opposed to level of ambition 3, so a higher international benchmark. So I can imagine if one were in the cybercrime unit on Garda Síochána or in NCSC, you'd be looking at similar numbers. So as a country, how are we going to move in that direction, and also from the Defence Forces perspective? So
yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and it's a key challenge for me is staffing and how am I going to build out these structures. So obviously I'll use my own organic resources, and I mentioned 3 tiers: communications operatives. I would see them being trained up to probably level 1 analysts in terms of sitting in front of a SOC. We've got a managed service solution in place where we bring in external managed service layer 2 analysts. Typically, we would try and piggyback on the initiative of the National Cybersecurity Centre in terms of the terms and conditions they utilised for their more recent recruitment programmes. We've pointed at those and have espoused the use of the same T's and C's for the recruitment of civilian employees to backfill our Joint Cyber Operations Unit on an incremental basis, 5 per year over the next 5 years. So I would see approximately 25 civilian employees working in our Joint Cyber Operations Unit. And in the cyber ORTs, in the brigades and services, they would be more the deployable cyber personnel to deploy out on military operations abroad. But another key feature of the staffing model that we embrace is the incorporation of reserve personnel. And there's significant levels of sophistication from personnel who've served within the Defence Forces and who've left to work in the IT industry, but also personnel employed in the RDF, the Reserve Defence Forces, and many of whom we integrate routinely into our military teams for the likes of Cyber Coalition, which is an annual cyber defence exercise run by NATO. And again, the final point, just to answer your question, in terms of any contention or conflict with the National Cybersecurity Centre, I wouldn't see a scenario where we would be competing with or developing like technologies or like capabilities as the National Cybersecurity Centre. Ideally, we deconflict and try and develop complementary capabilities, albeit the basics in terms of defending our network, building out a SOC and SIEM capability, level 1, level 2 analyst would obviously be common to both. But, for example, if the NCSC identified a requirement for a specialization in reverse engineering Chinese malware, well, that would be fine. We wouldn't prioritize the development of reverse engineering of Chinese malware. We'd perhaps look at a different type of malware so that we could complement each other. And the same would apply. I mean, I know it's an adage, but we're the sum of our parts. And from a military perspective, we look at other MilCerts, military certs throughout Europe, 27 nation states, and we look at collaboration routinely, and we go for discrete capabilities. So if the French are particularly good in one area, we'll go to the French. And of course, it's based on reciprocal arrangements, which is a challenge in terms of our own staffing models currently, but it's certainly a model that I would see working going forward.
Great, thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any questions? Great, I think okay, I see 3 hands. So I'll start here and then yourself, and we'll move over across if that's okay. There's a mic here.
A question in terms of the satellite constellations that are being deployed. Is it going to start getting pretty congested up there eventually? And is collision detection and avoidance and junk avoidance an issue for, do they have to cater for so many losses per year due to collisions and stuff like that?
No, they can't cater for any losses, is the point. If there is... The mesh. Oh, it'll become a disaster. It'll become unusable. So it's, as of actually 2 weeks ago, I suppose it was... Look, I mean, Russia's not the only one to have done one of these ASAT tests. I mean, the US, India have done likewise. But as of just 2 weeks ago, there's now countries, the US have led a move to sign up where no more ASAT tests. Lifetime of satellites have to be under a certain time frame, that they must, once they're out of service, that they must re-enter. There's a lot of criteria about what you can put on board in terms of materials. that they have to be able to burn up in the atmosphere. Some of the concerns obviously are what is, if with so many satellites and what the effect of some special metals, let's say, burning up the atmosphere, does that have an effect on the climate? But there's a new emerging industry that is, it's usually been government-led, that actually has to track satellites, predict conjunctions, and then satellites have to have onboard thrusters to be able to mitigate and move to avoid those conjunctions. So it's becoming a highly complex space traffic management system operation. Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Great. Yeah.
I was going to ask that question. Question for Mark, though. We had a good chat last night. When you get to the 100 personnel headcount, where do you think, from a defensive and offensive perspective, will that leave Ireland Inc. compared to Europe or the other European countries in terms of capabilities?
And again, it's quite a sensitive question in terms of cyber offensive operations is something that is alluded to within the Commission on Defence, and clearly would need a very strong governance model in place in terms of the employment of any potentially offensive weapons in terms of their capabilities, but also the contagion associated with their employment. So that would be very much governed by a whole of government approach, and DFA, DOD from a policy level perspective, but then obviously the military. Interestingly though, cyber offensive weapons are readily available on the dark web. We could all access them today with a bit of Bitcoin, and could be lashing them out into cyberspace. So it's from a cyber offensive prioritization, it isn't something that I would necessarily envisage as being significantly developed in the context of the level of ambition 2, which is the additional 100. Level of ambition 3 would be, if we move from LOA 2 toward LOA 3, building out to 300, which is LOA 3, I would see us developing a more offensive capability in a controlled environment as part of building out to a level of ambition 3.
Thank you, Mark. I think we had a question over here.
Thank you. Hi. First of all, Owen, Galway, yesterday, Damien Brown coming in. Nobody knows about this. A rower came across the Atlantic. So we had a big celebration yesterday. A couple of people didn't know. The whole thing of space-carried internet is fascinating to me. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on and how do we actually secure it? And I was thinking particularly in terms of GDPR being very much in the news, yes, especially with the UK now. We have to do these, what's the word? Adequacy agreements. How are we going to face that with all of the countries around the world if we start looking at, like Cooper's coming in towards the end of the year, Viasat is already deploying as well, and then of course with Starlink being very mobile, security is going to become a bigger and bigger challenge, I think. So I just wanted to put it to a question. What's your biggest fears? Or your biggest security challenges you need to fix?
That's for you, John.
That is a big question.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So for us, it covers the full spectrum in terms of everything from the spec of the actual technology we're developing. So we need to do it in particularly whoever the customer is, it needs to be in a facility that has a facility clearance. The design obviously has to be highly protected, so it can't be, we have to make sure that it cannot be accessed through any external systems. We have our own production capabilities, so we have to ensure that all of that's cyber secure as well. And then once it's deployed, the actual technology has to be, secure by design, and we have to take that at the physical layer, the software layer, and I suppose we're always trying to find out what interface where we say, look, that's as far as we can go. That's now the responsibility of either the full system integrator, the folks that maybe build the satellites, the ground infrastructure. So this is one of the key things. So Europe's launching this program called Euro QCI, European Quantum Critical Infrastructure. And this is where all member states will be deploying optical communication ground infrastructure to really built this quantum internet. And yeah, it's a discussion that's active. I think, look, in terms of GDPR, you mentioned this is, the US doesn't have some of those same limitations we have over here, but they have a lot more at the security layer. They have a lot more with regards at a government layer of just how they currently operate. What also different challenges, look, Ireland not being part of NATO and things like that, actually does create challenges in deploying this sort of infrastructure as when Ireland would join part of such networks. So it's really having to all the time, look, being a commercial company in the midst of all that, the biggest fear is all the time having to be part of a much larger conversation. And that's why, the events like today and tomorrow's event at the Aviva, in terms of building the ecosystem, it's having this sort of conversation is what's vital to really allay some of these risks. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I've been given my instructions. We have 1 more minute, but do we have time for one more question? That's a no, I think, is it? Is it a very brief question, please?
I think the question earlier there.
Yeah.
Just for John, just in terms of all the how busy it's getting in the LEO area around the Earth, and the Earth being not that big in real terms, and notwithstanding all the sort of geopolitical situation with China and Russia and the States, who's managing it now, and what's the plan about managing it going forward, insofar as that there be some neutral organization, I don't know, the UN or somebody that's managing it, so that we don't have accidents between countries up there?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one, because how you basically get permission to launch a constellation is done by the ITU, so you have to get access to spectrum. So that would be largely based radio-based spectrum, because optical at the moment is unlicensed or unregulated. So if you were going pure optical, you could launch sort of if you want. But so that's sort of largely how it's currently being orchestrated and given permission. And you have to get permission for how many satellites you're going to launch. And at the moment, there is this move from, at the moment, the US government would do a significant portion of monitoring potential conjunctions. The European Space Agency would also have, in Darmstadt, would have a center of operations there that would monitor all their space assets. And then again, at a European level, SATCEN do it more at a European context, and there's a global, shall we say, infrastructure of various different sensors that are operational. But to be clear, they can only measure to certain accuracy and distances, and a lot more investment is now needed. And this is what there's a lot of conversation, discussion about this now, deploying hundreds and thousands of more ground-based sensors. What's the role of commercial industry as part of this? So it's happening all in real time, and I think this is what is so challenging, is that these satellites have got permission to launch. They are launching. They have to do it by a certain schedule and a deadline, and everyone's having to catch up to be able to manage this sort of new emerging capability. So it's by no means perfect, and it's a little bit of fingers crossed on some cases. Yeah.
Great. So thank you, Mark and John. I think we have a coffee break now, but just 3 last points that strike me listening to our experts, and I'll keep them very snappy, Owen. I can see you looking at me very worried. Just this question of access to EU funding and trying to connect some dots. We heard from one of the experts from NCSC this morning about the European funding opportunities, and we heard about the European Defence Fund just now. I guess one of the obstacles is whether we have the right security clearance regime in place in Ireland. A second takeaway that strikes me based on Mark's comments, but also the findings in the report on the Commission on the Defence Forces, which I hope, if you haven't read already, you might take a chance to read it. But defence is the best offence, ultimately. And on the offensive capability question mark, there's some very high-level policy questions to be answered going forward. And then thirdly, on the implementation piece, and if we're welcome back this time next year, we've tried to play our cards right this time around, but it will be interesting in 1 year's time, or 6 months and 1 year, and then 2-3 years, just to measure and see what has actually been achieved in terms of implementation. The committee that has been established is an intergovernmental committee, and there is due to be a member of the NCSC on that implementation committee, overseeing the type of work that Mark was describing. So it's going to be an interesting year ahead, and so let's see this time next year at the Cyber Ireland annual conference how far we've come. So no pressure, Mark, and so thank you both. Thank you, Mark and John, and thanks everyone.